Hey, Larken Rose here. If you want to try to convince somebody of something, let's say the concepts of self-ownership and non-aggression and voluntarism and that fun stuff, the more you understand about human psychology, the better, because people aren't just data entry machines. You can't just put in info and expect them to be reprogrammed. That's not how they work, and I'm glad that's not how they work. You shouldn't have such a power over other people. That would be creepy and weird. But when you're trying to explain something that you care about and is, you understand the truth of it and the importance of it, and then you're talking to somebody else and if you don't understand their psychology, you will likely not get the results you want. That's why I made Candles in the Dark, and then later and more recently made Making Anarchy Mainstream. But there's a particular aspect I wanted to talk about in the rant today, which is just the difference between a intellectual understanding of something and a gut level understanding of something. Because those are almost independent of each other in a lot of people. And one can be on board and not the other one, or it can be the other way around. And understanding that and being able to keep track of it, whether you're talking about the population in general or one person you're talking to, that's important to understanding how to actually get through to people. For example, I remember back when I intellectually understood the concepts of self-ownership, when I first when I reasoned myself out of statism and I fell off the political spectrum by realizing logically it's impossible for there to be such a thing as a legitimate moral government. Can't be done. If it's legitimate and moral, it's not government, because government is necessarily violent coercion. But even after that, I could still feel the deeply trained in gut reaction to the sight of, the guys with badges and uniforms, the law enforcers, because I was trained and I grew up around people who shared this attitude that, those are representatives of the law and you need to respect them and say, yes, sir, what, sir, and be super compliant. Even when I knew intellectually that was stupid, I could still feel the residual training, which was really weird. And it's since worn off, as you may have guessed. But it lasted pretty long, because somebody understanding something on an intellectual level doesn't change their lifelong assumptions and their thought patterns and their perceptions of reality overnight. And so I know a lot of voluntarists have talked to people and, they know, and, they've told me, well, it sounded like he understood it and we had this good conversation, and then 2 or 3 days later he's saying the same statist garbage and I don't know what to do. Because you're tinkering with this, but not taking into account the gut level assumptions and the way they've always seen things. And that's a really hard thing to overcome, where the way you think reality is sort of gets all the way into your guts, and it's hard to change that. Even if intellectually oh wow, it isn't that. It isn't what I thought. It takes your body a while to catch up. So people can intellectually understand the concepts of self-ownership and non-aggression and go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And at a gut level, still have all the indoctrinated authoritarian assumptions and perceptions of reality. And there can be a conflict there inside the same person. The book Obedience to Authority by Stanley Milgram, the guy who did the experiments on basically to what level will people obey an order just because an authority figure told them to do something, even if they think they're harming an innocent person. And you could totally see the conflict there, because a bunch of people, having been conditioned in an authoritarian society that you do what you're told and obedience is a virtue, they weren't just going, this is fine, I'll just electrocute a complete stranger. A lot of them were asking to be able to stop and saying, I'm not sure this is right, and sweating and shaking and crying and being asked, and this is the one who thinks he's zapping somebody else. Nobody's threatening him. It's just an authority figure saying the experiment must continue. So you can see the conflict inside one person of their training to obey authority. It's exactly like a dog's training, Well, we train that it's Pavlovian thing. Well, you ring the bell and you give the dog food, and then the dog associates the bell with the food, and you ring the bell and he salivates. He doesn't have a choice. He doesn't hear the bell and go, wait a minute, where have I heard that before? Oh yeah, it seems to me that there's been a pattern between here. It's instinctive, it's gut level, it happens automatically. And there's a whole lot of ways in which like animals are trained that way and people are trained that way. And sometimes the training isn't even intentional. It's just if this always happens and you associate that with it, you like a lot of people say, well, I have an irrational fear of whatever because when I was a child, I got scared by a snake or I got bit by a dog or something. And their gut level reaction, even if their intellectual brain could go, yeah, I know most dogs are perfectly fine or most snakes or whatever. They're like, but there's this gut level thing that just happens. PTSD is very much that. If somebody's been off in war and they come back and they hear a car backfire and they wake up and they're shaking and they're terrified and their gut level is like, you're going to die. And their brain's like, no, I'm not. I'm at home. And their gut's like, I don't care. You're going to die. That reminds us of the you're going to die feeling. And often the brain can't override that. So until the gut level understanding changes, if it ever does, there's this weird conflict inside a single person. And you can even compare it to something as simple as, the kid who's scared of the dark. Like, oh, he's scared in his room. Is there something under my bed? And is there something in the closet? And at some point of age, the adult can go, there's nothing really in there. Like, we can open the door and look around. And the kid can understand in his brain, yeah, I know there's nothing really there, but I get creeped out. And a bunch of adults still do that when it's in the dark. They get creeped out by stuff, even when intellectually they say, yeah, there's not really anything that I have to be scared of, but I'm creeped out. Because being creeped out is a gut level reaction. It's not, you're reasoning things out and deciding to be creeped out. It's not how that works. And so when you're talking to somebody about something that you care about and want them to understand, you have to realize convincing just their brain, you're not done. It has to sort of seep into their entire consciousness and their whole perception of reality. Now, the good news, and this is sort of weird good news, sometimes the gut level gets to the truth first before the thinking level does. Like I was just talking about how if you're talking to them and trying to get them to intellectually understand self-ownership and stuff, their gut may trail along. Most of the world, when it comes to authoritarianism, is now the other way around, where at least most of the US, the overall sort of gut level perception of authority has been drastically changing just in recent decades, and in fact in recent centuries. And actually, I give a bunch of examples of this in Making Anarchy Mainstream. But for example, it wasn't that long ago where people thought they could own other people. Like slavery wasn't that many generations ago. Like people thinking, oh yeah, that's my property. Like it walks and talks and what do you mean? That's a person. What are you talking about? And now everybody at a gut level has a hard time imagining their intellectual brain ever thinking of that. Like we can't relate to that because our gut level is like so obviously and instinctively perceives that as evil and insane, which is a good thing, that it's hard to imagine people rationalizing that and being okay with that unless they're like complete sociopaths. But the good news is the perception of reality, like the perception of cops and politicians, even among people who are still intellectually statist, they still believe in law and democracy and you have to vote and all the mythology they were taught, the gut level respect for authority has been going downhill for a long time. And a lot of that has happened just in my lifetime. Like it used to be that both candidates for president were treated with respect and often even with reverence. And whoever won was often treated with respect and reverence, even by the people who voted against them. Well, he's the president of the United States, and he represents the office, and he blah, 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 blah. People thought that crap, and they felt it deep in their heart. They don't anymore. They can still believe it intellectually that, well, yeah, we have to have a president and we vote for this and I vote against that guy and for this guy. But the overall perception of politicians as, well, they're noble public servants, that's just out the window. That's just gone in the vast majority of Americans and probably in a lot of other countries. But I'll speak to what I mostly know, which is the American attitude. There's massive disrespect all over the people. Even the ones they vote for, they don't respect. It's like, well, yeah, I know he's a corrupt slimeball, but he's not as bad as the other corrupt slimeball. So on the surface, it may seem like, well, people are still just voting and they're still believing in this BS. And it's easy to miss the importance and the positivity in the gut level decline of the respect and authority. Same thing with cops. People used, and I remember feeling this, people used to actually look at cops and go, oh, you're an officer of the law. Yes, sir, whatever you want. I'm definitely a law-abiding citizen and proud of it. So whatever you want, sir. And today, a hell of a lot of people understand things enough at a gut level that they're like, friggin' road pirates. All right, I may behave so he doesn't shoot me or tase me or something. Maybe I'll even not get robbed today and he'll just give me a warning after he swaggers up being a little Nazi jackass. That's how a lot of people view them now. So if you just gauge it by, well, people go along with it today and people went along with it 70 years ago, you'll miss a very significant change in the human psyche and in human perception when it comes to authority. And there's reason for optimism there. Because when the gut leads by, we don't respect you anymore, we laugh at the politicians on both sides, they're both crooked, they're both corrupt, they're both a bunch of jackass jokers or horribly evil sociopaths or some combination thereof. Most people recognize that. And a hell of a lot of cops are complete power-happy slimeballs, and most people recognize that, even if they're still going along with it. That is huge, and that is why, and I've seen this myself, and I didn't do scientific data entry to be able to show you my results, but just my own personal experience today. The average person who's never heard of the concepts of voluntarism, if I start talking about it, the likelihood that they'll at least be receptive to a conversation is way, 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 way higher than it was with almost anybody just a few decades ago. Because if their gut level already tells them, the politicians are all evil slime bags and probably something way worse, and the cops are all just power-happy buttheads, if that's their gut level perception of things, suggesting to them, yeah, you don't have any obligation to obey them, they don't have any right to rule you, for their intellect to catch up to where their gut already isn't that difficult. But if they really feel a gut level profound loyalty to our great public representatives and public servants and their laws, we have to obey the law, we need law and order. If somebody's gut level perception of reality is that if you try to talk their brain into going somewhere else and realizing that, yeah, we don't have any obligation to obey them, they're just people, they never had authority, there's nothing special about them, except maybe their level of psychopathy, then you're trying to pull their brain away from their gut. And it can be done, but it takes more time and it takes more effort because their gut level instinct is holding them back. And again, I've talked to a bunch of people who said, I've talked to my friend and it seems like he understands these things, and then a few days later he reverts to statist garbage. That's because his gut takes a lot longer to move. The beauty is that the guts of almost everybody in the country have been moving away from authoritarianism, even though on the intellectual level they still believe in statism and they still believe in voting, and they hold their nose and vote for the lesser of two evils and play the ridiculous game. But at a gut level, the perception, the concept of self-ownership and individual sovereignty on a gut level is way more understood by a hell of a lot of people who don't yet understand it intellectually. They wouldn't call it any of those things. It's just sort of this vague thing that will You don't get to barge into my life. You don't get to control me. I wasn't hurting anybody. Leave me alone. Just sort of that general vague, like they don't even think in terms that could be called a philosophy, but they have this underlying assumption and perception of people that just like, hey, if somebody's not messing with you, don't mess with them. Like, okay, that's the sum total of anarchism and voluntarism. Somebody's not messing with you, don't mess with them. Most people understand that at a gut level already in a way that they didn't not that long ago. Because their gut level respect for authority was way higher. And they actually, like, they would say things like, my country, right or wrong. Which, like, I haven't heard anybody say that for a long time. That was a saying. It literally meant, even if we're the bad guys, I'm going to keep supporting our team. Ew. That's not a fashionable thing to say anymore. Now, they do their propaganda to try to make, the people think that the cops are the good guys and the U.S. military are the good guys, which is getting harder and harder with, like, cameras all over the world showing, no, they're freaking not. Look what they're actually doing. But that's intellectual understanding is like taking in data and like, oh, maybe these are the things they're doing. But that gut level shift is really important. And I would encourage you to be on the lookout for that when you're talking to people. And when we teach this in Candles in the Dark, find the part of them that already resents some particular example of authoritarianism. Some part of them, because there's always going to be some law or 10 or 20 different laws that they're like, yeah, that law is horrible and destructive and evil. And different people from different parts of the political spectrum will have different things that they mostly focus on to object to. But it doesn't matter. If you can find the part of them that at a gut level says it's really not okay when authority is doing this to people, that sucks. Tune into that and then bring their brain up to level with that so they can understand why. And I'll end by pointing out that is the definition of what I've for a long time called default anarchists, is the people whose gut level perception of things and gut level instinctive feeling of right and wrong was already all the way anarchist, but their brain was, just still had the statist noise in it. And when they hear these ideas, they go, oh, okay. And I've had a lot of people tell me that, like, they read my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, or they watch videos from me or somebody else or whatever, and they go, oh yeah, that clicked so quickly. It made sense, made perfect sense, matched what I felt anyway, so it took me 2 seconds to get there. And other people, it's this slow, laborious, dragging them along inch by inch, trying to get them to understand the bleeding obvious. But the ones who seem like they take 2 seconds to get from here to there, it's because their gut already got there. Their gut was already hugely suspicious of authoritarianism. They just still had the intellectual statist fluff they were taught. But if they look at it and they go, yeah, over there is where I feel like I'm supposed to be anyway because my gut's there. And so it's important to understand that, both to understand how these people get there really fast and to understand why it can take a lot of extra time and effort when somebody's gut is very authoritarian still, and you have to drag them away from it. Like if somebody was just a cop or something, or a soldier, well, that's actually sort of an interesting example, because I know a hell of a lot of people who used to be in the military, whether in combat or not, I know a bunch of both, who are now voluntarists, because they learned firsthand just how insane and evil and destructive it is, so their witnessing of the physical reality drag their gut really quickly from rah, 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 I'm protecting freedom and democracy to holy crap, I'm just a member of a gang doing evil stuff for a bunch of rich psychopaths. But a lot of people, if their guts are still there, you have to understand how powerful that is, and don't be surprised or discouraged when just giving the intellectual thing doesn't make them just go, oh, 1 + 1 is 2, okay, now I'm an anarchist. And it's so easy to get frustrated. And the thing is, I'll end with this, I bet, however fast you made that journey, if you try to think back, assuming you were a statist at one point, which the vast majority of anarchists were, not every single one, but the vast majority of people I know, including myself, who's now an anarchist, we used to be statists. If you think back to your own journey, can you remember the inertia of what you believed and how you saw the world and what you believed about like the Constitution and law and our constitutional republic and our representatives, and here's the way. And even if you intellectually understand, oh, that was all BS, do you remember having to slowly drag yourself, your gut level instincts and perceptions away from that? Because I do. I'm kind of embarrassed by how long it took me to drag my guts until I could catch up with my brain and go, yeah, the Constitution was authoritarian BS. That took a long time for me to dare to look at that. Even after, like, I didn't even like to hear that even after I was saying it. Like, after I understood it and realized, yeah, the Constitution wasn't pro-freedom. It wasn't legitimate. It was words on paper, and the worship of it is ridiculous. And I would still feel a twinge inside me, but it's the Constitution, because that gut level understanding and perception of reality is really dang important. So when you're talking to somebody, keep in mind you're not talking to a computer. It's not just this analytical thing processing data and coming up with an outcome. There's a person in there with a lot of gut level inertia of what they've assumed and perceived about reality, or thought they perceived, their entire life. So try to be patient as you try to get their brain there and then help them do the very slow tug of war to drag their guts over to where it belongs. Or be on the lookout for people whose guts have already gotten there and their intellectual just hasn't put it together and hasn't heard it in terms and, you know, added 1 to 1 and got 2 and got, oh yeah, we own ourselves. None of that was legitimate. Because there's a lot of them out there too, and that makes the conversation really fun, and it takes about 2 seconds. But if you don't understand how much power, that weight, the inertia of the gut level assumptions of a lifetime of indoctrination and viewing the world a certain way, if you don't realize the staying power that has, you're likely to get frustrated and confused and like, well, I laid out the logic for them. Why didn't that work? Because you weren't talking to a computer, you're talking to a person. And people deep in their psyche have these just anvils of what they've always assumed and how they've always seen the world. And even when their brain has figured out something, their guts sometimes take a pretty long time to catch up. And then sometimes there's the people where the guts get there first, and then making their brain go there is just ching, oh, that was easy. So anyway, just keep that in mind when you're talking to people, that now it isn't just data entry. You can't just go, here are the principles that prove that government is illegitimate. There, am I done? No, you're not. Because they're people. They're not machines.